Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. In most cases, video games based on TV shows end up being complete rubbish. This is of course with the exception of an elite few. The Simpsons Arcade Game is one of these gems. This game is loved and adored by many. In fact, including the Patreon backers of this channel, who helped choose today's subject by taking part in a voting process to pick today's content. The Simpsons Arcade Game is a unique beat 'em up in that the majority of games from this genre often took a gritty approach, or were based on franchises that included a lot of fighting, whereas the Simpsons Arcade Game was created around inspiration from a sitcom about a cartoon family. This game that is cherished both now and on release is thought of by many to be an arcade exclusive for some bizarre reason. So in today's video we are going to take a look at the history of this game, its gameplay, what made it so great, and even take a look at the largely forgotten home ports. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad history of the Simpsons Arcade Game. Yeah! It's no secret that Konami were damn fine contributors to the beat 'em up genre, particularly in the arcade, with some of their finest work being the Turtles games, X-Men Arcade, and of course the subject of today's video, the Simpsons Arcade Game. This arcade title was released all the way back in early 1991, when the Goliath Simpsons franchise was still extremely young. The concept for the animated TV show, that is a satirical depiction of family working class life, started life as far back as 1987. The Simpsons first featured in animated shorts within the Tracy Ullman Show that year. The dysfunctional family were of course conceived by Matt Groening, and the shorts proved so popular that after 3 seasons, Fox would give them their very own half-an-hour primetime TV slot. The Simpsons' own show would debut in 1989, introducing a wide ensemble of main and supporting characters. Groening said his goal was to create a show that offered the audience an alternative to what they called the mainstream trash that they were watching. When we now consider that the show is still running 31 years later with 684 episodes and counting, the show proved to be very popular, even though it is very clear that Matt Groening chose to go back on his word, as I can't think of any show in 2020 that is more mainstream trashy than modern Simpsons. Simpsons counterculture is dead and buried, but the 80s and 90s were very different times. When it comes to the Simpsons Arcade Game, it looks like it was released halfway through the run of the show's second season, meaning that whilst the game was in development, it only had season 1 to work with in terms of source material, meaning that the game depicts a very early form of the Simpsons franchise, which we shall dig more into as we make our way through this video. Like the Turtles games we have already looked at, the Simpsons Arcade beat 'em up offers a 4-player cooperative play experience, in this game's case offering players the opportunity to play as either Bart, Lisa, Homer or Marge. Once again, like with the Turtles, there was also more budget 2-player cabinets manufactured as well, but to get the full Simpsons experience, a 4-player cab is needed. Like other Konami games of this genre from the time period, players control the characters using an 8-directional joystick with additional buttons for jumping and attacking. We'll touch more on what you can do with this control scheme shortly. The game opens up with a condensed version of the TV intro, simultaneously displaying short character bios. The game starts out with depicting the Simpsons colliding with an apparently evil and sinister, Smithers. Smithers in this game is depicted extremely differently to the Smithers we would grow to know and love, and in this game's case robs a large diamond from a jewellery store for the already rich Mr. Burns. Strange plot really. Anyway, this diamond flies up and lands in Maggie's mouth, causing the maniacal Smithers to go as far as kidnapping the bloody baby. I did say that the developers had a shortage of source material to draw upon, but this makes me wonder if they even watched the bloody Simpsons. So, the rest of the game features the Simpsons final fight style brawling their way through Springfield, fighting through halls of enemies to defeat Mr. Burns, evil Mr. Smithers and ultimately save Maggie. I can't say I've ever seen this Simpsons episode before. The game takes place over 8 stages, each of which we shall analyse shortly, but first let's talk about the game's combat. Each of the 4 playable Simpsons family members have unique attacks, To the loathing of feminists, Mars fights via swinging her vacuum cleaner around. Bart hits people with his skateboard. Homer throws flurries of poorly coordinated punches, a bit like me, and Lisa uses a skipping rope. So the fighting techniques are at the very least faithful to all the characters from the show. Double team moves are also possible in this game, which vary wildly depending on which two playable characters team up. There are some interesting and novel moves here. As expected, many beat 'em up tropes are also included here. Health meters, food items to replenish health, and melee weapons to wield. Some of these are even faithful to the show, such as bowling balls, a weapon people would associate with both Homer and Marge. Every time I play a level from this game, I instantly get flashbacks to playing this title in its prime at Dreamland in Margate. As a child, this game looked awesome, as it does now to be fair. The bright colours pop out of the screen, offering memories I cherish to this day. The first stage takes place brawling on the streets of Springfield, taking down enemies who are either supposedly hired mobsters or suits from Mr. Burns' power plant. I can't really tell, but their ill intentions are illustrated via their frowny faces. Angry. These enemies, according to my sources, are simply known as goons, whilst these older, more rotund enemies are simply known as fat goons. Great use of adjectives. I like that many enemies exit from the buildings, giving this downtown area a feeling of life. There are even other character sprites in the buildings, including an old woman who can hurt players by swinging open her front door. Speaking of this world feeling alive, other characters make cameos throughout this game. For example, Skinner and Martin Prince run away from goons who crash through the fences behind them. It's the touches like this that make the title so impressive looking. Other examples of additional movement taking place in the background of the opening stage is the birds land in the trees as you take on firemen. The boss of the first stage is a professional wrestler from the Simpsons universe known as Professor Werner von Braun. If you do not recall his appearance in The Simpsons, I would not be surprised, as he simply appears in a scene where the characters were watching one of his matches on television. Still though, with only one season for this game's developers to draw upon, it's no wonder they were stretched a bit thin with source material. Defeating him prompts a scene showing Mr. Snivers escaping in a crusty hot air balloon with Maggie. This brings players to a bonus stage where players tap buttons to inflate a balloon first. Stage 2 takes place in a theme park known as Krusty Land, with plenty of recurring enemies and character cameos aplenty throughout the whole stage. Early on in the stage, a battle takes place against fat goons in teacups, further emphasising the theme park aesthetics. There are Krusties too, who fight riding on bulls, and rabbits, who debuted in Matt Groening's comic strip series that started all the way back in 1978. The boss fight of this stage takes place against a Krusty balloon, which is probably my strongest memory with regards to playing this game in Dreamland as a child. Stage 3 takes place in a woodland cemetery area. Amongst recurring enemies in this level includes the likes of zombies and ghosts. After that, the players descend into a grave, which takes you to a trope in which would be illegal not to include within a beat 'em up. A bloody lift area with enemies attacking from either side. A boss fight takes place in this area outside of Moe's Tavern, which is deep underground for some reason, which is against two goons. Stage 4 takes place in Moe's Tavern itself. We have some great cameos here. Moe's cleaning the bar, some exotic dancing ladies are in the background, and even Bleeding Gums Murphy's here. I also like that the actual Simpsons Arcade cabinet appears in the game itself too. There are some new enemies here as well, including a woman who throws barrels, but the fight of note obviously takes place against the stage boss, which is just a character referred to as Drunk Man. Did this character appear in The Simpsons? The next stage takes place out in the wilderness. In this stage it almost feels a little bit Golden Axe-like. Sideshow Bob and Three-Eyed Fish both make cameos here, as players fight across various platforms before taking on a bear at the end of the stage. Nothing too spectacular to report here though. After falling down a waterfall in a failed attempt to rescue Maggie, the Simpsons end up being knocked out cold, entering a stage called Dreamland. So wow, in my past I played a stage called Dreamland in a physical location known as Dreamland. Dreamlandception. Obviously this stage is as psychedelic as one would expect, with fights taking place against all sorts of inanimate objects. The weirdness throughout possibly makes this my favourite stage. The boss fight takes place against a giant bowling ball, because as mentioned before, it felt like at the time the developers of this game struggled to find good source material for enemies, so Homer likes bowling, let's just make him fight a bowling ball. A second bonus stage then occurs. This one is much like the first bonus stage, however this time players must slap their player character in the face to wake them up. A nice little transition if you ask me. The following stage takes place at the Channel 6 TV station, offering a ton of variation from the various sets found within this building, meaning fights against aliens and robots even take place here. There is also an Eastern set where players take on ninjas, which concludes with a boss fight against a Kabuki warrior. Amusingly, again with a premise as western as The Simpsons, Konami still managed to find a way to ram a large chunk of Japanese culture down consumers' necks. Nice! At least it feels like a bit of a homage to other beat-em-ups though. The final stage takes place at Mr. Burns' power plant, which simply consists of two boss fights. Firstly, players must take on the devilish, maniacal, bomb-throwing Smithers, followed up with a long fight against Mr. Burns riding a mech suit. Mr. Burns is basically the Emperor Palpatine of this game. Upon defeat, Maggie is rescued, resulting in one final cameo from Marge's sisters and Grandpa Simpson, bringing the Simpsons game finally to a close. So, as you would have seen from everything I showed you, the Simpsons Arcade Game is one of the most unique beat-em-ups of its era. Sure, mechanically it's very similar to many other games from the period, but the game's characters and stage scenery vary greatly from everything else that was on the market, and even to this very day, the game really stands out and looks great. The game also functions as an interesting time capsule celebrating the Simpsons' success in the early years, offering cameos from many of the Simpsons' early popular characters. There are so many nods to the show, even if many of them are incredibly obscure these days. The game is certainly an adaptation of a cartoon done right. But what about the home ports of this game? The home ports to a title that was apparently, according to many, an arcade exclusive for quite some time. And why are these games so overlooked now? Let's explore this in the final portion of today's video. Personally, I think these ports' obscurity is mainly down to the systems they appeared on. In the early 90s, people were obsessed with games on two companies' platforms, Sega and Nintendo. Simpsons Arcade, on the other hand, appeared on DOS for the PC and the Commodore 64 of all things, a very dated platform by the dawn of the 90s, from the microcomputer era. In the DOS version of the game, sadly, much of which made the arcade game so special is lost. The game seems to offer very few enemies on screen at once, the constant cool cameos have been reduced, and the combat's satisfying animation cycles and sound effects have basically been removed and reduced to nothing. The game at least still looks graphically very nice. It's just a shame about everything else really being cut back. All the levels are present in this game, and the most noteworthy thing to say about this port really is that it exists. Nothing else to report here. Personally, I find the Commodore 64 version of the game the more interesting of the two, especially when you consider what limited hardware the system would have presented developers with. For a Commodore 64 game, this title is fairly impressive, and it's cool to hear all the game's music running on the system. The C64 offers unique sound indeed. Every element of the game seems to have been painstakingly recreated in 8-bit, which is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. It's bizarre really that time was made to make an impressive port like this on the Commodore 64, when no port was made available on more mainstream platforms at the time, like the Sega Mega Drive or Super Nintendo. A bit weird really. It's also of note that the original arcade game would be ported to the Xbox 360 and PS3 in 2012 as digital downloads, but for me at least, and many other people, this was too little too late, as we had it available via MAME for many years anyway. In my opinion at least, being a waste of time. But at least it speaks for the game's legacy, that it would be re-released on modern hardware 20 years after its initial run. It's also of note that technically a completely new game was released called Simpsons Arcade in 2009. In a way, it's the game's sequel, but that's a whole story for another time. Let me know if you would like me to cover that one down the line. But to conclude, I hope I helped illustrate to you why this is such a special game, why it still has a fan base today, and a look at the game's bizarre, often forgotten ports. The Simpsons Arcade Game will forever hold a place in history as one of the best games ever made based off of an animated TV show. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, today's topic was chosen by the amazing people who support this channel over on Patreon. Backers receive early access to all of these videos completely advertisement free. They also gain access to my Patreon exclusive Discord, get to vote on polls, watch my exclusive vlogs, and receive handhelds around the world episodes 1 month before anyone else. You can even earn production credits at the end of these videos. Special thank yous and shout outs go out to some of the people who made this video possible. So thank you so much to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Heo Polo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Doug Perkins, Ego, Alethea Swanson, Angel Light 85, Asobi Kwang DX, Aswell Rarakai, Brian Barry, Cambo Rambo 82, Carlos Domingos, Computer Man, Daniel Daly, ECU Professor, Evan Balder, Gary Pinkett, Gianni V Santizi, Glennie Glenn, Hamid Musa, House of a Ted, Joaquin Varela, Jordan Durant, Keith Ferguson, Lars Zondervan, Matthew Robinson, Michael Cullix, Nick Daniels, Philip Namph, Prince Knight, Prince Zana, SpongeMatt B, Timothy W Haskins II, TOG Driver, Since Spaces, A Murder of Crows, Adam Castin, Adrian Hannington, Ernest Rainsberg, Andrew Bazansky, Andrew Pearson, Antonio Rodriguez, Bernard NG, Baba Kitty, Chris Fisk, Chris Margarine, Chris Cool, Craig Jenkins, Crazy Yarl, Dan Barlow Jr., Dan Van Dam, David Ball, Francesco Lacriola, Gregory Smolragiewicz, Hans Christian, Ivan M, Jake Whitford, James Bishop, James McDonald, JB, Jazzy Tay, Joel, John Bates, Kings Knight, Langston Miller, Lobster Puncher, Luis Fiant, Luke Canava, Marco Soto, Marvin Aroliga, Master Jinx, Matthew Rindle, Me Machine Dean, Michael Hall, Mike Bruno, Noob, Paul Elliott, PlayStation's Better, Posty XL, Punky Dudestar, RetroVersion.com, Richard Stu Stewart, Rick67, Ron Stubb, Sarah Powell, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Stephen Lewis, Time Lord Samwave, Tom Elliott, They Mink Renee, Wazzo Jugs, Zai. Thank you all of you for supporting this channel at such a level and allowing me to continue to make multiple videos like this every week. Yeah, I'm a happy man.